Welcome to the London Property Podcast, your go-to source for navigating the complex and ever-changing London real estate market. Our digital marketplace provides informative and educational content from industry leaders through podcasts and videos. We cover various aspects of the real estate experience, including buying and selling, finance, law, tax, construction, design, and more. Join us as we delve into the latest trends and developments in the market and gain valuable insights from our panel of experts.
Hello and welcome to London Property. I'm your host, Farnaz Fazaipour, and today we've welcomed Clive Levantin back to the show. And as an expert in Landlord and Tenant Act, today we'd like to pick his brain about the Renters Reform Bill.
Indeed.
There are so many things that are scaring people away from investing in rentals. And we're going blue in the face trying to convince people to hang in there for the medium long term. Don't give up on the UK. You know, we're going to make it happen. But this was just another nail in the coffin. So can you tell us about the good, the bad and the ugly when it comes to the Rental Reform Bill?
Before I talk about it, thank you for inviting me back. I think for investors, rental investors in prime central London, I don't think that these new rules are as ugly as they might be for people who are investing in other parts of the country, for reasons I'll explain. So the Renters Reform Bill is currently going through Parliament. It's going through its third reading. It's now quite advanced, so we've got a very clear sense of what's going to be in there. Of course, things can change at the last moment, but we've got a good sense of what it looks like. And if I take you through what the key changes to the law are going to be as a result of this, we can, as we go through it, we can talk about, well, how does this really impact upon investors in prime central London?
Okay.
At the moment, the vast majority of tenancies that investors grant are assured short-hold tenancies, what we call ASTs for short.
And just before you continue, just give us the breakdown. There's a rent limit and conditions that make an AST.
That's right. Effectively, if you go virtually no rent, it's not an AST, but people aren't renting their flats virtually no rent. And at the moment, if you give very, very high rents, over £100,000 per annum, then you're also outside
of the act.
But of course, that is to be a very enormously expensive property before you get into that territory. So the vast majority of people letting their flats are letting them on assured short-hold tenancies. And those tenancies were created under the Housing Act of 1988. There's been a few changes as we've gone along, but broadly speaking, the definition and what is an assured short-hold tenancy is the same as it was from the very beginning. So what's really unusual about these changes is that when they're brought into force, and we think it could be as early as late summer or autumn, then there won't be a transition period and they will operate retrospectively. So historically, when there's been changes to tenancy law, you used to have the old regime, something was granted under the old act or under the old rules, those continue to apply, and you had new tenancies under the new regime. In this case, these new rules are going to operate retrospectively to change the terms of existing tenancies.
Right.
So there's not much you can do. So historically, people might have been rushing to grant new tenancies. No point here. So that's one of the first things for your clients and people who are thinking of letting their property. Doesn't really make much difference whether you do it now or you do it in a few months' time. So the key changes are these. At the moment, most ASTs are granted for a year, 2 years, whatever it is, it's a fixed term. And there may be some break clauses in that. Possibly you grant the tenant a 3-year lease, but you can say if you want to break this, you can break it after 2 years. Or sometimes landlords will say, I'll grant you a 2-year tenancy, and as long as you give them 6 months certain, you can reserve yourself a right to break the lease yourself.
Yeah.
All existing tenancies will be converted, and all new tenancies will become what we call periodic tenancies. So they're effectively almost like month-to-month tenancies.
Carrying on the same terms as before.
Well, so because we'll come on, other than rent, and we'll come on to that in a moment. What this effectively means is that there won't be a fixed term. And what it means at the moment, if you let your property for a year or 2 years, particularly if you took a sizable deposit or something like that, tenants simply couldn't walk away. You knew you had the security of the rental income for that period. Of course, always a risk that someone wasn't going to pay, someone was going to disappear. But absent that, you knew, well, I've let my property for £3,000 a month or £4,000 a month, whatever it is, and I know I've got that for that period. Under the new rules, effectively, anyone can give 2 months' notice to
At
quit.
any time.
Any time to go.
So they're going to abuse it and stay for short let and pretend they were going to do long let. But that's just me being devil's advocate here.
Absolutely. If someone wants to do that. Now, and this is one of, I think, those differences between prime central London and just the general rented sector around the country. And this legislation, of course, was designed to protect the abuses mostly around the country where landlords aren't behaving very well, where they weren't looking after the property, where they were serving notice to evict people, trying to get them out after 12 months, or would do so by trying to put the rent up too much. Whereas the investment market in prime central London was pretty much the nature of the properties is they're looked after to start with. Of course, there are exceptions to that rule, but on the whole, the properties are in good condition. And probably, dare I say it, is people don't tend to rent a property in prime central London and stay there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Whereas people around the country in the rented sector, often they've found a flat, they like it, they want to stay there, their kids are at the local school or they've got a local job. It's really disruptive for them when they can be forced out after a year, when the rents could go up to whatever amount the landlord wants, and if they don't agree to pay the new rent, then they've got to move on. So the legislation was intended to protect
those tenants.
Yeah. But of course the rules will apply to everyone. But because, as I understand, you probably know this better than I do, my instinct here is you might have someone who stays 1, 2, 3 years, but it's pretty rare in the prime central London market for tenants to stay 5, 10, 15, 20 years. On the whole, people tend to move on. They're here for a short period, or they then go and buy somewhere, or they move on for work, or whatever it is. The nature of the people who are renting in prime central London is not the same as general property.
Well, there's also the nature of the landlords, right? So if the landlords are accidental landlords and the landlords, got married and they had a property, then they need to sell it because they're going to buy a bigger home. So I think there's a double-edged sword here.
That's right.
So, I think that some people would welcome the idea of not being disturbed, but carry on.
So first of all, rent's now going to have to be paid monthly. You won't be able to take more than a month's rent up front. So all these things that people do to take more security, you take, say, a 3-month deposit, or you take 6 months rent up front. So a lot of those things that give comfort to landlords, that I know at least I'm safe for this amount of rent if my tenant
doesn't pay.
ups and offs, then it's going to be a lot less protections like that. But you still have various rights to get your property back. So this isn't a charter, particularly in prime central London, for people just to sit and not go. So there are a whole set of new grounds and some old familiar ones which you can still use in order to get possession back. So it's currently 2 months. It'd be if the rent's in arrears for more than 3 months, you can apply to get your tenant out. If you want your property back because you want to live in it yourself, or you want to sell the property, then you've got to give them 4 months' notice, but you can get your property back. And likewise, if there's persistent breaches of covenant, things like that, then there's still going to be grounds to get your property back. Okay. And they're not that different to
but I guess
those
the
that
breaches have to be quite substantial.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But in the same way at the moment, if someone's just minor breach of tenancy at the moment, of course, if you had a tenant that was really annoying you, what you would do is you get to your 12 months and just give them notice and you get someone new in. And that's the type of thing you're not going to be able to do anymore. So that is where the balance is being changed.
Practicing mindfulness.
Absolutely. So sad indeed. So the question then, and the big second question is, well, how does this affect my rent? So first of all, you're not going to be able, the idea is if you market a property at a rent and someone comes and offers you more, that's not quite clear whether that's going to come into force yet, but there's a possibility once you've marketed, effectively you can't have gazumping. So I've offered it for £1,000 a month, then you're not going to be able to then let it for more than £1,000 a month. The real issue though is going to be, at the moment, you grant the tenancy for 12 months, and then you'd go back at the end of it and say, I want to put the rent up to X, and if the tenant didn't agree, you'd say, in which case then, here's your 2 months notice under the current rule. I want the place back when I already let it at more. Now you're not going to be able to do that. What you are going to be able to do is once a year, you're going to be able to serve notice on your tenant to say, I want to increase the rent to open market rent. If the tenant disputes, that is the open market rent, they will have an ability to apply to the first tier tribunal, the FTT, to have that rent determined.
Right.
So, whereas at the moment, you would say this is the rent, they don't want to pay. We say, well, you might negotiate. If they don't agree, you know you can get your property back fairly quickly, and then you would try to let it at the higher price, a higher rent if you think you can get it. You're not going to be able to do that. And as the way it's currently drafted at the moment as well, there's a possibility there's going to be a real incentive for tenants to, even if they think that is the market rent, there might well be an incentive for them to say, well, I'll go to the tribunal to have this determined, because the way it's looking at the moment is that you've been there for a year, here's your notice to increase the rent. If the tenant then applies to the tribunal, we don't know how long the tribunal will take to determine that. The government are talking about, well, we'll set up new systems to make this work quickly, but we all know that often doesn't happen. Then probably would have been fair to say that whenever the rent is determined, it should operate retrospectively back to the 12 months. So, but at the moment, the way things are drafted, it's looked as if the new rent will only come into force when it's determined by the tribunal. So if a landlord waits to 12 months, serves the notice, I want to put your rent up by this amount, even if it transpires to be fair and reasonable, it might take X many months to get to the point where that's determined and they can start charging the new rent. So that does make it more difficult for landlords to increase the rent.
Okay, Clive, I'm waiting for the good news.
Okay.
So far, all we've heard is bad news.
Okay.
But
yeah, well, I think the good news...
This doesn't take into consideration the fact that, most landlords are paying 30% more in their mortgages, and with all the best will in the world, you might actually just get chucked out by the bank when you've refused all these things and you've gone to the tribunal.
I'll tell you what the good news is.
Yeah.
I mean, you might think this isn't good news.
Yeah.
But first of all, you're going to be able to charge market rent. So if market rents are generally increasing, then you're going to be able to increase your rent. It might take a bit longer, it might take a bit of time and effort to get the rent increased. The corollary of that, of course, is that because of all of these issues, is there going to be, because some landlords are not just going to be able to say, well, I'll take my property back, I'm just going to put the rent up to that, because there's such demand in the market at certain times that I knew I could get a lot more rent. Now that what is perceived and actually fixed as the market rent might be a fraction less than people would be hoping to achieve. But, and I think this is important, is because the prime central London market is more fluid, people move on. This is a real issue for investors who have historically either sought to increase rents annually by quite a lot and people have been willing to pay it, and if they haven't, they've got their property back and can increase it. But those are people who are often had tenants who only move because they're forced out effectively by their landlord putting up the rent to a sum they couldn't achieve. Whereas in prime central London, as we've said, my experience of this is people tend to be much short-term anyway. So if you have a tenant who is only going to stay a year or 2 years, at the end of that, they vacate, then you can start by asking for a rent. If someone's willing to pay the rent you want to charge for your flat or house at that moment, you'll be able to charge it. So I don't think these new rules are going to have quite the same depreciating effect on rental income or rental investment values in prime central London. I think the nature of the market in prime central London is going to stop these new rules hurting as much as they might in other parts of the country if you're a investor.
I'd say from your mouth to God's ears, because 25% of the stock that's on Rightmove at the moment is landlords leaving. And I know that some of the legislation change was deliberate, over the past 10 years to try and get institutional investors, get rid of the individual landlords so they can't deduct their interest payments from their income. So deliberately getting rid of the sort of accidental landlords, going more towards an institutional type model, which is fantastic. But how are you going to do that? How are you going to own 200 units in Kensington and Chelsea or Westminster?
I appreciate that. I mean, I think for your listeners, obviously the people listening to this podcast will obviously be those who are investing or have invested and still invest.
Yeah.
And as I said, one of the problems here is that these rules were introduced to deal with issues and problems that weren't necessarily that prevalent in prime central London.
Yeah.
They're more prevalent elsewhere. So they're not great if you're a landlord. They do impact on the way in which you can operate. My instinct, it's only a gut instinct, because you never know how these things are really going to pan out into the future. You often think things are going to be terrible and they end up being better. You often think things are going to be quite good, and then people notice the wrinkles after. My instinct is that this probably will have ultimately will have a modest impact on the value of residential investments in prime central London. I think people will see that probably their yields returns might go down a fraction. But I think once things settle, they should settle at what is the proper market rent.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think prime central London was ever yield driven anyway, and it's much more of an appreciation kind of, park your money somewhere safe. But, at the same time, I guess people would just go back to home ownership versus rental because, my generation, so many people rent because it's actually become so expensive to buy.
Yes.
And you would prefer to have professional landlords that will let you rent for as long as you want. So I guess that's the icing on the cake when we get there. But for the time being, it is just adding another load of problems. It feels like you're taking the free market economy out of it. You can't take your rent in advance. You can't ask for this. So you're sort of limiting to people to a fixed economy.
Absolutely, yeah. So put it this: it's not good. If you're a rental investment, you would obviously prefer not to have this new legislation. I think we need to see how we're going to pan. But I think it's very interesting. You talk about the institutional investors. Of course, in large parts of Europe, a lot of the rental sector will be landlords who own multiple units. Yeah. And to be fair, some of these rules, giving much more security of tenure, we're just not used to them. We haven't been used to them since 1988 when the old rent tax were abolished. Many of the changes simply introduce the type of rules that apply in most of Europe at the moment anyway.
Yeah.
It's just that our property system has always sort of stood on its own. It's had its own idiosyncrasies and its own ways of operating. So we talked about the good, the bad and the ugly. Mm-hmm. Not that much good. I don't
you say.
for investors, I don't think the bad or the ugly is quite as bad or ugly as people are thinking. I think a lot of this will settle. Now, a couple of other things that one of which will perturb investors, one a little bit, one of which will not. So there's going to be more regulation. Landlords are going to have to now effectively register on effectively a new private client sector database. So there's once it's been done once, I think it'd be fairly easy. There's more administration costs. Mm-hmm. Probably those who've got managing agents managing their properties for them will probably be another fee for that. But I suspect, again, it's probably marginal. So the intention of this is to
hold
try to see
landlords responsible.
that's right. Which is when you
That makes sense.
And again, it's something for the rogue landlords.
Yeah.
Rather than those who are responsible, and the fact that you'll register, and as long as you're looking after your property, that'll probably be the end of any regulatory involvement or interference with what you do.
Yeah.
And the other one, which you might have heard about, is there will be a implied term that a landlord can't unreasonably withhold consent to people having a pet in their flat.
Yeah.
But
I've been using that for a while through the European laws, but yes.
But that's unreasonably withhold. So, so for a lot of prime central London, you may well own a flat which you're renting out, where your lease or the regulations relating to your building mean that you can't have a pet anyway. So if you've got one of those, you wouldn't be unreasonably withholding consent.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would be able to impose conditions. So if suddenly if you've got to go to your own landlord in order to get permission, then you'd obviously firstly have to do that. So if they think it's unreasonable, then you can simply say it's unreasonable down the chain, and you can still impose conditions. So if someone wants a dog, you can put a condition on it that clearly if their dog causes disruption to other people in the building, then the permission's potentially terminable if there are problems like that. And there's provision for you might be entitled to ask them to take out additional insurance to cover any damage caused by pets. So again, it's one of those things, just trying to make that's really not going to impact on someone's investment value. But again,
I'm less concerned about the investment value, more concerned about the appetite. I think that, people are just like, it's too much of a headache, I can't be bothered, which is fine, so long as you and I find people who are going to put together portfolios of 100 units at a time in prime central London and buy them all within a mile of each other and manage them nicely. Yeah. And then we sell that to somebody else. That would be the dream.
Yep.
But to get there, you're in this situation where there just isn't enough stock. It's getting less. Rents are high. And landlords can't actually afford to be affordable because all the other expenses are making it impossible to actually be cash flow positive. So fun and games.
In the end, it'll be supply and demand, won't it? So if there's sufficient demand, the market rents will be high enough that the fact you're limited on a review once a year to only charging market rent will be sufficiently high value that in the end it won't make that much difference to you. The problem will come if, as you say, it all becomes, it's all too difficult. If it's all too difficult, people withdraw from the market. If people are not, then institutional buyers aren't coming in, we're flooding the market, more properties on the market, that produces general capital values, and that has a knock-on effect generally. Although someone said to me the other day, well, if that happens, if values do generally, property prices come down in price central London, people might, if they're looking at yields, take the view, in which case it's come down by enough that I can come back in and the rents that I'll achieve based on having acquired a property at that price make it look attractive again. I think, and of course, those are the cycles we've seen. I've been doing this for 35 years. Yeah. I've seen the
and I think you and I remember when we could buy a flat and put down 10% and take 90% mortgage and still manage to afford to pay our monthly bills.
Absolutely.
So, I think that there is an element of the market going back to the locals. I get it. But, I think that there is two sides to the story. All landlords are not evil. And, in order for them to survive, they need to have some free market economics to work with.
I think that's right. But I think we'll have to wait and see. But I think unlike other areas of law at the moment where we aren't quite certain what's going to come in and when, it does at the moment look like the new rules I've described. That's what they look like at third reading. They've got general cross-party support. The Labour government anyway have got enough votes to get them through. So we think that this will be introduced. This will happen. And I think it will have much greater impact upon the non-prime central London market than it will in prime central London. But I might be wrong. Time will tell.
Before thanking you and saying goodbye, you mentioned that landlords can't ask for rent more than monthly.
Correct.
Can a tenant pay the rent if they want to more than monthly? Just finding ways that the market will fix itself.
No, I think
So a tenant can't say, I want to pay you 12 months in advance?
I'm sure, put it this, between the four walls of this podcast, I suspect that will still happen.
Yeah.
I haven't seen exactly how that is going to be phrased, but I think it will be unlawful for a landlord to accept rent on that basis.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So even if a tenant says, you know what, I want to pay you 12 monthly.
The whole purpose of this is if you're always free to give 2 months' notice, why would you want to give 12 months rent up front? Now, of course,
To beat the next guy from getting the house you can't find, basically.
Absolutely.
Right.
And again, that is where prime central London's being thrown in with the rest of the country, and where those are the type of issues which, of course, problems. There are people who desperately need rented accommodation, and unless you've got the bank of mum and dad to give you 3 months deposit or 6 months rent up front.
They want to make a level playing field.
Yeah, to be absolutely honest, I've got friends who've helped their children out. Their children are trying to get a flat, and they say, just offer to pay the whole year's rent up front. I'll pay it, and then you can pay me back once a month. And if you haven't got the bank of mum and dad to do that. So there are lots of people at the moment who really are prejudiced in the rental market. But I'd say, but we're not talking about the central London market. We're talking about the much more modestly priced properties around the country.
Right.
Like all landlord-tenant legislation, in the end, the legislation is designed to cure and address
A problem.
a problem that doesn't apply to every property and to every landlord and to every tenant. But you can't have different rules.
Well,
for different
memo
parts
to the
of country.
government, allow people to put their properties into companies so they can deduct their interest payments and actually survive. Provide housing where they can't take their rents up. Thank you very much for coming. And we look forward to speaking to you again about more cheerful things.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to our latest episode of the London Property Podcast. Head over to our website where you can browse our exclusive network of top experts driving the market. As a member, you'll have direct access to our experts and their networks. Our award-winning content will help you choose the right professionals for your needs and make informed decisions about your investments. Personal recommendations are a powerful tool in connecting with trusted professionals. Let us introduce you to the right people to help you achieve your real estate goals. Contact us now to learn more about becoming a member and gaining access to these valuable resources, or joining our directory of experts.